immigrant, and other statuses. And all those things I always told you can't ask about. I'm still going to say you can't ask them about it, but it's nice to know about it. And that's kind of where we landed here. I'm going to give you some information I hope maybe new, probably not, maybe some things you've heard of, but it's kind of based on some of the questions that I get regularly. A lot of you know I still do some part-time work for DESE while we're getting the Title III person trained, and I'm always happy to talk to anybody about this kind of stuff. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the future, a little bit about what we've seen over the last year and what we should be seeing in the next few months, next year, when it comes to refugees who are coming to the state of Missouri. And to kind of update everybody, I now work for the Missouri Office of Refugee Administration, where I'm the school programs manager, which means I have some, first that means I have some money that I give out to as part of grant programs to different school districts for different populations of refugees. And you'll see here in a little bit, when I say refugees, I mean more than refugees, other populations as well. So I give out funding to schools that comes from the Office of Refugee Resettlement. And I'm also available to help school administrators, teachers, when it comes to working with refugee families, working with refugee resources, the different organizations that sponsor refugees, that assist refugees when they come to Missouri. I can work as a go-between between those agencies and school districts to kind of help alleviate some of the issues that may be coming up when it comes to things like enrollment or communicating with parents or just cultural issues. So that's kind of what I'm here today, and I hope I can teach you something, tell you a little bit about something you may be familiar with but want some more information. So right now, there is what we would consider a worldwide migration crisis. It's not the migrant crisis that we hear on the news. It's a whole different worldwide scope of it, where we're seeing things happening all over the world. And what I usually say, that if we hear of some sort of conflict or something going on in one part of the world, look for people from that part of the world to be coming to our shores, looking for refuge in the not too distant future. So right now, it's been the largest placements of refugees in our country since World War II when it comes to per capita and just the sheer numbers. So many people are being displaced. Cammie's quote about home, nobody wants to leave home unless the home is the mouth of a shark, is what we're seeing. I use the quote sometimes that an immigrant is somebody who's looking for a greener pasture, where a refugee is somebody who the pasture they're standing on is on fire. They have to get out of there. So the whole push-pull type of thing is what we're talking about. And I know a lot of you, probably most of the people on this call, have refugee students and have refugee families. And it doesn't take long to quickly understand that the background, the journey to get to where they are has made a big impact on student learning. And some of us have been very pleasantly amazed by the ability to adapt to a new country, a new location, to all the new circumstances, but we do still see issues where it's very difficult to make that adaptation. But the numbers are huge, and everything we're hearing from our sources in the US government, the United Nations, and the different places that refugees can be placed is that it's not going to be slowing down. For instance, we know earlier this year, we got information that 40,000 new special immigrant visas were being issued, right? Now, special immigrant visa is, well, I'll talk more about that later, but it's kind of a fast track way to get people resettled. So we heard that early in the year, the 40,000 new ones, and then we heard last week another 15,000 on top of that. And those aren't all coming to Missouri, but Missouri is one of those states that does receive a lot of refugees and a lot of placements by the United Nations. So the latest refugee groups are Syrians, Afghans, Ukrainians. That's not necessarily surprising, but that's where we see the most conflict going on right now. But as you'll see, we know that they're coming from lots of different places. We kind of anticipate that we're going to be getting a lot more from Central America, Guatemala, Ecuador, those types of places in the near future. We already are seeing a lot of Cuban Haitians, which aren't necessarily considered to be refugees, but they're eligible for refugee type services that we provide, our agency provides, so they would be eligible for refugee school impact grant funding. So basically what a refugee is, they're fleeing from war, persecution, and they expect that they may be able to return home at some time, right? That's their hope, because so many cases of them, we're getting family separation. I've heard so many stories of families who've had to leave not only children behind, their parents behind, people who couldn't travel quickly, aunts, uncles, cousins, and those people are being bartered for funds, for blackmail, for turning in other people. All kinds of different things are happening with the family back home. So it's a really trying situation for them. So to gain refugee status, you first have to go out of your country. You have to leave, let's say Afghanistan, get out of the country somehow, and then ask to become a refugee, ask for asylum and become a refugee. So I can never fully I will never be able to imagine that issue of what would cause somebody to leave your home, flee to another country, and basically beg to be saved. And that's where a lot of these people are. And they'll usually wind up in refugee camps. People can wind up in refugee camps for many, many, many years. But they just can't go home, even though they want to, and they want to get back to family. So refugee status will be granted in the county that in the country that they wind up in. And from that point, they can ask to be placed in certain areas. If there's some sort of connection in certain areas or family in places, they can ask to see if they can go to the United States. Even sometimes they could ask, once they got here, that they might want to wind up in Missouri because they have family, or in the Midwest, something like that. They don't have a lot of choice, but I know that if possible, and if there's a sponsor or something like that in that place, they can get that. They can. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about these. And this is kind of what I always talked about before. We don't really care how they got here, as school people. We just know they're here. If they live in our district and they can show us they've had their shots, we're going to enroll them, right? We don't really care about their visa status. We don't care about how they got here, all those kinds of things. And that was the message I've always given. And I still do in some respects when it comes to legality of making sure you enroll every kid, because we all agree that a student, a person of school age, the best place they could possibly be is in school. So we want to get them enrolled. We want to get them in school. So an immigrant is one who will leave their country and settle permanently in another. They don't have that same kind of idea of maybe I'll go back, or I need to get family out, or something like that. They're going to come here generally, okay, with the idea that this is going to be the new home, and they may support people back in their home countries, but generally they decided that this is the place to be. A migrant in the circles that I'm in now is more just they're just leaving the regions. Either they have a plan to do it, they need to do it for work. It's just they feel like something's going on, but it's not happening in their area yet. So they just are going to get out. They don't really know what the next steps are going to be. We know that the migrant program for school districts is a little bit more defined when it comes in education. It's for those students who are doing agriculture-related work, or their families are doing agriculture-related work, or working in forestry. So those students are generally following the crops, or they're working in processing plants, hogs, chicken, turkey, pig, beef processing plants in our state. A refugee, as I mentioned, person who is fleeing because of that well-funded founded fear. Humanitarian parolees, and we have a lot of humanitarian parolees who are coming from Europe and mostly the Ukraine area, where they're only here for a short time. The parolees are given a 2-year status when they get here. And the idea is for them definitely is to go back. That's what they want to do. And that's the idea, that when things calm down, or they can go back, they're going to go back. So there's still a strong connection for humanitarian parolees to their home countries. Some of these students, and we're seeing from Ukraine, are still trying to work within the school district they were in back home by doing some online things, keeping up with their studies back home, hopefully someday to be able to go back and finish school in their home countries. And so, like I said, they're only here for a short while. And I hate that we use the word parolees, because there's such a connection to the criminal justice system for people who are on parole, but that's not what it is at all. They're just here for a temporary short period of time. Displaced people, they've left their home countries, for instance, Afghanistan. They've gone to Turkey, they've gone to some other country in the region, and they're still there waiting to be processed out. Those are a lot of those 40,000 people that we're going to process over the next few, or 55,000 people over the next few months. They're in the system, but they're not here yet. So that's almost just as bad as where they were before, because they don't know at a moment's notice where they may be moved, what the camp is going to be like. We've probably all seen the horror stories of the refugee camps and these types of places, and how the issues of cleanliness and hygiene are non-existent. This little picture is from a refugee camp. An asylee, they meet the definition of a refugee, but they've entered the United States by some other means. So these would be a lot of the people that we see at our borders who are showing up the border. They say they are there because of a well-founded fear of persecution, and they are applying for asylum. And they come into our country, and they'll cross the border, they'll apply for asylum, they'll get a court date, and while they're waiting on their court date, they are in the United States. We can help those people. Our offices across the state can help those people with certain things when it comes to settlement. Asylees, when they come into the country and they work toward getting their court date, they may have family or groups of people that are willing to help them out. So they may travel to other parts of the country because that's where their support is. And then our Cuban Haitian entrants are similar to asylees, but they are brought into the country and they're waiting their status adjustment. All these people would meet eligibility for our refugee programs, the refugee school impact grants that we provide. If they are involved in any of these things, I guess except for the internally displaced person who aren't in the country yet, who aren't here. If there are any of these different types of categories, then you could serve them with refugee school impact funding. And there's lots of different ways to serve them. It's very similar to the grants that are given out by DESE, but this comes from the Office of Refugee Resettlement. It is supplemental in nature, and it can be used for similar types of things: families, language support, cultural support, school supplies, different things like that. The same thing that you might be able to use Title III immigrant or LEP funding or migrant funding, different things like that can be used to help these people as well. And there's quite a bit of funding currently. So I kind of just zipped through that process. We found this little video that's about 7 minutes long. It's kind of a first-person account of how refugees and how they do when they arrive in the United States.
My name is Shawn. I'm from Eritrea, a country in Africa. My family was forced to flee to Sudan when violence broke out during Eritrea's struggle for independence. Ultimately, our family received refugee status and resettled in the United States. So who are refugees? And how do refugees receive the rare opportunity to rebuild their lives in the U.S.? A refugee is a person who is outside his or her country and is unable or unwilling to return because of a well-founded fear of persecution. This fear may be based on race, religion, nationality, social group, and/or political opinion. Many refugees face the possibility of being killed if they don't flee. Of the millions of refugees worldwide, far less than 1% resettle in a new country. Some decide to return to their home countries, and some are able to integrate into the host countries where they initially sought refuge. But for many people, resettlement is the only option. For my family, due to the outbreak of violence, it was not possible to stay in Sudan or return home to Eritrea. The only path to safety was to resettle in a new country. The United States has historically been a leader in refugee resettlement. Each year, the U.S. President determines the annual refugee admission ceiling in consultation with Congress. The U.S. also welcomes other people fleeing persecution. These humanitarian immigrants include those granted asylum, special immigrant visa holders from Afghanistan and Iraq, and Cuban and Haitian entrants. Many organizations and agencies work together to keep the U.S. refugee admissions program safe and secure. The United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, or UNHCR, referred my family for resettlement to the United States. Resettlement Support Centers, or RSCs, are run by nonprofit organizations in partnership with the U.S. government. In our RSC interviews, we explain the story of how and why we fled Eritrea. Our family was also interviewed by U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, or USCIS. It was their role to decide if we met the qualifications for resettlement. Throughout this process, we underwent rigorous security vetting, including screening by the FBI, the Department of Homeland Security, and the State Department. Refugees are screened more thoroughly than any other type of entrant to the United States. From the time a refugee is first referred for resettlement, it can take many months or even years before they arrive in the U.S. After this long process, our family was determined to be eligible for resettlement. We were so happy to finally receive the chance to move to a safe home. But first, we needed to complete medical screening, receive immunizations, and attend cultural orientation. Once all overseas vetting is complete, eligible refugees are approved for travel to the U.S. in a process coordinated by the International Organization for Migration. Until this moment, many refugees don't know which new city or town they will call home. Refugees are resettled in states and communities across the U.S. Resettlement agencies are nonprofit organizations that are funded by the U.S. government and private donors to help support refugees when they reach the United States. When we arrived, resettlement agency staff met us at the airport. They brought us to our new apartment, which was prepared with basic furniture, household supplies, and food. Federal agencies coordinate with states to make resources and services available to newly arrived refugees and other humanitarian immigrants. The United States funds many initial services through the State Department. Others are funded through the Office of Refugee Resettlement within the Department of Health and Human Services. Resettlement agencies, state and county agencies, community-based organizations, schools, and healthcare providers all work together to provide these services. Local communities, businesses, and faith-based organizations also offer support, including by volunteering their time, providing donations, and helping to create a welcoming environment for their new neighbors. With help from our resettlement agency and their partners, my siblings and I enrolled in school. My parents signed up for English language classes, received work authorizations, and applied for jobs. Other refugee services include opportunities to improve economic well-being by building personal finance skills, increasing career readiness, preparing for higher education, and even launching small businesses. Refugees also participate in health and wellness programs, including support with accessing healthcare. Special services available to youth include family, academic, and mentoring activities. Elders receive additional integration supports. My parents secured employment shortly after arriving, and eventually they were able to buy a home for our family. After 1 year in the United States, refugees applied to become permanent residents. Around 5 years after arrival, they may apply to become American citizens. Refugees are your neighbors, business owners in your community, and your children's classmates. As for me, I am now a member of the Switchboard team. Every day, I help improve services that enable newcomers to thrive, just like me and my family.
they can. If you're not on the, if you haven't been to the Switchboard website, and it's just a search for Switchboard and the Refugee, you'll find that there's lots of great information. So the video talked about the services provided to refugees when they get here. And these are the organizations in our state that provide those services. So these are the people who work for these organizations that I've listed here on the screen, who will meet them at the plane, find the housing for them, make sure the houses and the apartments are furnished and have basic grocery supplies and other things waiting for them, and are that welcoming group of people that go there. And they're located throughout the state. They have offices in certain cities, but they have the state divided up by regions. In St. Louis, we have a couple of them, the International Institute of St. Louis, which is the largest one that we have in the state, and then Inca Relief is new. Something happened there. Okay. The International Institute of Southwest Missouri, and also down in Joplin, there's RAISE, Refugee and Immigration Services and Education. Delalam and Jewish Vocational Services are in the Kansas City area, and they serve north up to St. Joe. And then Catholic Charities in Columbia, which serves all of the Northeast, and they have an office, I believe. I know they have people in Sedalia. I'm not sure if they have an office over there yet, but they have people who work in the Sedalia area because the population has spread out. And so I always talk to school districts when I can about partnering with these people as much as you possibly can. They are the ones that the parents are turning to now for all the support and help they can get. So if school districts can partner with these organizations, and when I mean partner, just build a relationship, get to know who's there, who's working with the refugee families. Every one of these is given funding to do youth mentoring programs, which is a great asset to the teenagers in the area that when they show up. So school districts who can participate and help them get volunteers for their youth mentoring programs, they would love that. So any kind of communication you can have with these groups would be welcomed by them. And part of my job, I work with each of these as well, because our organization is the one that provides funding to them along with the private funds that they get. So I have the opportunity to talk to them, and I've been doing a lot of training with them on enrollment procedures. I try to get them as much updated information on who in certain districts are a good contact person. So probably everybody on this call,
Shawn, when violence broke
are the people that I recommend them to. I don't really recommend them to go to the superintendent's office. I'm generally going to send them to the EL coordinator's office or somebody who I know in that district. So these would be great people to partner with and get along with if you can. Okay, Cami, what's next here? I can't even remember. Oh, yes. They talked about the services that they get, the first month mandated services. Now, let's remember, they only get 90 days worth of funded services through refugee centers. That's another thing that's hard for me to imagine, getting 3 months of support when it comes to housing and rent and EL support, which EL support can last longer than that if they stay within the program. So it's pretty fast. Their refugee cash assistance, which is about $2,700 per month for 3 months, is about all they get. From as far as support, they're expected to get a job. They have to develop a self-sufficiency plan and find work, and then start paying their own bills after those 3 months. That's what the government provided funding. They have lots of other funders who are local charitable organizations. Almost all of those organizations that I mentioned are faith-based organizations. They're affiliated with some religious group, except for the International Institutes or Inca Relief, but the others are connected to some faith charity fellowship. So they can provide additional services outside what the government provides, and they do. But those are going to be locally funded. So they're constantly out there trying to find new sources of revenue and new sources that they can continue to help people. The thing I want to go back on that previous slide, you don't have to change it, but you did hear in the video that they are receiving their immunizations when they're going through the health screenings as refugees. And within the first, that they get their immunizations as well. And I know that can always cause issues when they show up and they don't have their immunizations. I mean, that's not an education thing, that's a public health thing, that's a requirement. So they work really hard to try to make sure that they get their shots and they can get school enrollment. They're also providing EL classes for the adults. It's not similar to what you're doing in schools as far as academic English. It's very rudimentary, and it's just basically conversational English. And I know they would love any kind of support and help that they could get. So materials, things you don't use anymore, if you could donate those to our refugee resettlement agencies across the state, they would love it. They also do all these other things, especially help with getting a job. Okay. So looking ahead, these are the estimates that we're looking at over the next few months. All right. Some of you participated, and I want to thank you all for providing me your numbers for the refugees you're expecting or have right now. We have more than 3,000 that have been reported refugee students looking at for next year. In the next few months, these are the numbers we're going to see who are going to be new, not just students, but all ages, as we go forward in the rest of 2024. So over 1,100 in St. Louis, almost 1,000. You can see where they're being dispersed in our state. We don't know very far ahead of time how many are coming and where we're going to put them. So these are the ones we already know are on their way and they're going to be here. So over the next, probably through summer, this is what we're going to see being resettled. So if you're in one of these areas and you know of some great housing available that you can get really, really cheap, I'm sure a phone call to the local resettlement agency would help, because they're really looking for places for people to live. Back at the end of 21, early 22, when we had a large influx of Afghans, we were having to put them into hotels and different really substandard housing. A lot of them would have been considered homeless because they were put in inadequate housing facilities. And we also see that numbers of them, when their time runs out on their 3 months and they stop receiving the rental assistance, they're going to double up with another family or something like that sometimes, because as we all know, rents are really high and places to live are hard to find. And so when that happens, that's another thing, that they could also be considered homeless in some situations because the housing they wind up in is not considered adequate. So the Office of Refugee Resettlement expects us to get another 5,000 before the end of the year, and just a couple thousand here over the next few months. I did a little look in our database, and these are for last year. These are the different languages that were reported. You can see there was 47 different languages reported from our refugees. Most of them were Pashto or Dari, which meant Afghans generally, or from that area. But they're pretty much spread out across the spectrum here and all the different languages. I know this is kind of hard to see, but I just want to kind of illustrate the point that you probably see all the time anyway, are all the different languages. The days when we had 2 or 3 languages to deal with are long gone, I think, especially when it comes to refugees. Okay, Cami, I'm going to try to. And the interesting about this that I found out, that if they come from, let's say, Afghanistan, which is my example here, that about 34% of them, 34 to 40% are Dari, and then Pashto are the rest. Some of them do speak English. I wouldn't say it's academically that they are proficient if they're speaking English, but some do. All right. But they're entirely different languages. If we went and got somebody from Afghanistan to come and be working in translation or interpretation for us, it's important to know what their language skills are, what background their languages are. That's why it's so important to make sure we have the translation, interpretation all worked out, because we don't always know. And we've seen that throughout the years with the Spanish language, that there are different dialects and different things, and it doesn't always work just to have a Spanish speaker. But when they're coming from the Middle East, it's different. And they can tell you they speak a Farsi, but there's different types of Farsi depending on the country they come from. So it's important to understand those things and be ready for it. Okay, King. So these are some reminders that I like to just throw out there whenever I'm doing things, is try to remember the cultural issues that a lot of these kids are dealing with. We know what's going on, that the biggest story we're hearing is from Ukraine. We're not hearing much of the war going on in Afghanistan anymore, only because we're not in it. But it's still happening. The Taliban is still doing terrible things in that country, and people are still leaving. And there are so many people that work for the US government who are still there, who are part of that special immigrant visa population that are trying to get moved out of there so quickly. But remember that there's a war going on, and a lot of the students from that Ukraine are going to have some sort of connection to people who are still there or who died in the war, or many of them lost homes, lost things that they knew as home, right? The whole cities, family members, things like that. These are not little walking history books for us to try to gain knowledge of. Let them do their talking as they want to do their talking. Now I understand this is information I've received. I'm not too sure about it. I do know that a lot of Ukrainians have received English instruction as they were in school. On the part about being able to pass the WIDA screener, I'm not sure about that, so I would make sure they took it. And we looked at those results, right? And on this last part is try to imagine how traumatizing it could be if all of a sudden your fire alarms start going off. It's a regular fire drill that everybody knows what to do. But for these people, some of these children who had to deal with air raids and alarms that really meant that bombs were on the way or bombs were hitting, what kind of trauma and stress that could have on them. So let's just be sure to make sure they understand what's going to happen. If you can tell them ahead of time that we're going to have the fire drill today, and this is what we do. This is a practice round, so we don't have to deal with the trauma and the issues when it actually happens. All right. I may have put this one out of order. No, I don't think so. It's a good place. Anybody have any questions right now? She told me about this time. Start thinking about wrapping up. Have any questions in the chat or anything?
No, I don't see any.
Shawn,
but
I have a question.
All right, Ron.
Hi.
All right.
I think I know the answer, but I've never had this happen to me. So, and maybe you covered that. To be honest, I stepped out for a minute, and I hope I didn't miss you. So, if I'm a school, someone's gonna contact me about receiving a refugee student. So this isn't like a child find thing where I need to figure out if I have any refugee. Like I should be contacted ahead of time, someone will say, we have a refugee family and we'd like to enroll students in your district. We'll be there whenever. Is that how it works? Like,
well, no, that's how it should work. You're right. You said should.
Okay.
And that's part of the job that I'm doing with the refugee resettlement agencies. I'm telling them, my message to the refugee resettlement agencies, the people that are meeting the families at the plane and getting them resettled, is to immediately let the school know how many students we have and start having that communication with what does the school need for me to enroll them? Where do I show up with the kids? What do I need to bring? So that's the message that I'm telling everybody, right? In the LRAs. Now, there are other organizations besides LRAs that are also resettling families, and those are called private sponsorships. They may not have that, and I don't have really any communication with them, or I'm not able to train them or anything like that. We give them that information if they've applied for it. So they may not. So they may just say, there's the school, head on over there, right? And the family will show up. There's not, and there's other faith-based organizations that aren't part of LRAs that are doing those kinds of things, who are very well-meaning, they just don't really get that part. Even people in the LRAs, I'm hearing, aren't really doing it correctly sometimes. And when I hear about that, I would love for school people to tell me, these kids just showed up and I had no idea they were coming. Then I can kind of look into it to see where they came from and may hopefully correct that. I'm glad you asked that question, though, because it's not always that way, but it should be that way. And that's something I'm trying to help with. And that's another thing. If schools can have that communication with those LRA folks, especially the people doing youth mentoring and who are doing the caseworkers, things like that, that would make that a lot easier, because I know it's difficult, because a lot of what we see mostly is the kids showing up at school and they have not had their shots or any documentation of their shots. And then the process starts at that point when it should have started at an earlier point. We said if they went through the refugee process, they're going to get their immunizations, but not all people actually do go through the vetting refugee process. They may have a private sponsorship going on where they've had a different type of visa.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob.
Shelley has her hand up. Go ahead, Shelley.
I do. I just have a follow-up to that. So we have a great relationship with Catholic Charities, and they do tell us when new families arrive and students are coming, and we coordinate our intake process and our assessments and all of that with them directly. It's the other families that you were describing, who are coming through different agencies or who have moved to Columbia, for example, on their own. So maybe they were resettled in a different state and then they chose to move to Columbia. Those are the students who, like what Rob is saying, is that a child find process? I'm not sure how, first of all, to find them, but also to identify them without asking their background.
Exactly. And that was the challenge I gave to school districts, is tell me how many refugees you have coming. And for somebody like Shelley, who's in the same town with the Catholic Charities and has some communication, there's a number right there that she does know about because she's been told, but she also has a number of them she doesn't know about. So you have to wind up asking them, what's your story? How did you get here? And if along the way they say this organization, this group, we were in a camp, we were brought here, that's going to mean that they receive some sort of refugee type assistance along the way. And you would consider them to be maybe a special immigrant visa holder or some other, they're applying for asylum and they're in the country waiting on their court hearing, something like that, that you're not always going to get that information. So you have to do some investigation to really find out who's eligible, at least for the school impact grants. But you can enroll them and then ask them questions.
So even those who we don't know exactly how they got here, will they have some sort of paperwork or paper trail?
Yeah, yes, they will. If they're waiting on their court date, they have a court date. They have a letter that they have, something like that.
Right.
Right. If they don't have any of that, you know, we're not going to assume they're undocumented, but we're just not eligible to serve them with these funds, right? But they're going to be an English learner probably, and we have Title III and all those other things.
Right. Elena, go ahead.
Hi, Shawn.
Elena.
How are you?
I'm good.
This was very informative in presentation for us as coordinators or program directors, but do you offer something like that to school districts?
Sure.
Because we have a big interest in all of this information from our teachers, administrators, and I wonder if there's something you are willing to contribute. Okay, perfect. I have you on the schedule for August. Thank you so much.
All right, that's cool. I went last week to the Missouri Association of Secondary School Principals and presented there. And I had,
well, we don't know who was there from St. Louis Public Schools, right?
no, I had 5 people show up. So anytime I can insert myself into somebody's day, I'm willing to do it.
Perfect. You pencil in August.
All right. Just let me know what time of day. You're right across, right across the street from our office there, basically.
Yes. Thank you.
Sure, anytime. Any other questions?
I always have questions.
All right, I got a question for Rhonda in a little bit too. So,
all right. I feel like this is a political answer. Refugees from Palestinian refugees or the current crisis, Israel, Palestine, are there going to be refugees from that area? Are they considered? I feel like there is some kind of political weird thing there. Do you remember? Can you answer?
There is a political weird thing there, and the best thing the only thing I can say is, as of today, United States will not accept refugees from Palestine, right? And there are some other countries, I can't name them right now. I don't know what I can't think of who they're, but there are some. There's a few, but as of today, refugees from Palestine will not be placed here. And you're right, it's political. It goes back pretty far. It's the whole relationships that we have with Israel, but that's currently the way it is. I know there's a state legislator who's filing a bill to make it to say that Missouri will not accept anybody from Palestine, which is ridiculous, but it is a political thing right now, and I don't see anybody taking it on in the near future. But if they can get out of the country and get to another place and gain some sort of residency there and then feel that they're still being persecuted, there is a process but it's a pretty far stretch. Getting out of Palestine is the hardest part. Now they're confined. So, but, yeah, I'm keeping an eye on that. I don't, but
Okay.
there's no movement to make that different.
Good to know. Thanks.
Yeah. And if anybody needed resettling, probably that group. Keep your eye on the news, though.
Mhm.
The news you trust.
Rhonda, do you want to talk to us about what's going to happen this week? Or are there any openings still in your conference?
I would love to have all of you who haven't registered yet come. Shawn will be one of our panel speakers, and you're doing a breakout session. So I feel like we're going to learn even more from Shawn. But the focus is on refugees. So if you can come to Springfield on Thursday, you're still welcome to register. We're going to have some information about teaching strategies, some information. Our keynote speaker is a principal in California who had a literacy initiative for his refugee students. So that will be really good for school leadership. So there's a wide variety of opportunities to learn. So Rebecca Thomas from IISMO will be there. So I'm looking forward to that too.
And my boss, the state coordinator, Paul, will be there.
Yeah, Paul Costigan.
Representing together. And my question for you is, do I need to bring my own projector, or do you know what's going on with that?
No, we'll have projectors there. Just make
Okay.
sure that you have some way to connect.
Okay.
In case the internet is not great in the room that you're in.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good. I don't want to lug that thing around in.
Yeah. No, we got you.
Okay.
All right. Any other questions for Shawn since we have him here?
You have, I think my last slide had some contact information. Please make sure, everybody will have that. It's not, I'm not hard to find, right?
Didn't have another slide, Shawn.
No, the one that we were on, the last one we were
Oh,
on.
sure. Let me
I think
reproject it.
if
Yeah.
you want to share it, you can.
Yeah, definitely. I have to put it back up there. Hang on. There we go.
Yeah.
And the newsletter. So there's
Yeah, that's
a
new.
QR
We put
code.
out a newsletter every week with information, and I try to add information that I get that related to schools and EL information in the newsletter, but it's mostly filled with lots of other good stuff.
Mhm. They're very informative.
I'll share something too, Cami, that actually Dana, who's on the call with us, shared with me today.
Mhm,
But KSMU, which is our local NPR station,
mhm.
is doing, I don't know if this is just a week or a regular series on refugees and the refugee story. So that's at ksmu.org. And I think you can listen to it live at 7:45 a.m. or 4:45 p.m. But you can always go back and search it too. So they interviewed Rebecca Thomas from the International Institute
Oh,
today, I think, and then they're going to do refugee stories this week. So I thought that was such a great idea.
yes.
Mm-hmm. So thanks for sharing that with me, Dana.
Well, the next slide is our mail specialists. So if you have any other questions, they also can be a great help to you. And as always, you can contact me. But if there's nothing else, if you don't have any other questions for Shawn, that kind of brings us to the end of today. I want to thank Shawn for meeting with us and sharing such great information. The video was awesome. I really appreciate that. And I put the link to that in the chat. It's also linked in the slides. But thank you all for being here. And thank you again, Shawn.
Thank you. Thanks, Cami.
Bye, everybody.
Kimmy, if we're able to stop
Cammy.
recording, could I ask
I-
the question?
I will stop recording, and then if you want to hang on.
I'd love to.
Sure. Let me get to that.